Hey everybody, this is a simultaneous my thoughts on Assassin's Creed Rogue as well as a video about the Assassin's Creed series and franchise fatigue, because Assassin's Creed is one of the prime examples of this phenomenon. Full disclaimer, before I made this video, I actually did not play much of the game at all, basically an hour or two at absolute most, and that's because I feel like I've played this game already, and it was called Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, and that one was actually quite a bit better than this. But I'll get to that more in a moment. First, to give you some basic information about Assassin's Creed Rogue, it was developed by Ubisoft Sofia, which is kind of one of their side studios, and of course published by Ubisoft in 2014 for PS3 and Xbox 360, which was really late for a game exclusively for those at the time, and it was released the following year for PC. And just for your reference, this was released on the same day as Assassin's Creed Unity, which was a full-on next-gen title, even though it was kind of a disaster as far as the technical aspects are concerned. But the thing is that the series has always been kind of messy in the technical department. It's always had some performance issues, some glitches here and there, some AI bug-out problems, all kinds of things like that that have just kind of marred the entire series. But when Unity released, it was a whole other monster, and this thing just kind of fell by the wayside as a result. All of the fervor around the Assassin's Creed series at the time was centered on Unity, and pretty much everyone seemed to forget Rogue even existed. Nonetheless, it was still pretty well received by the people who did actually play it. It's just that in the shadow of Unity, it's obviously forgotten. Then, of course, the question became, when I was taking a look at this, did it actually deserve to be forgotten? And the only answer I have for that, now that I've actually played the game, is yeah, it deserved to be forgotten. Because when you get down to it, Assassin's Creed Rogue is simply Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, but instead of a pirate theme, it is taking place during the French and Indian War, and you play as an assassin turned Templar, and thus turning into an assassin hunter. Mechanically, it is identical to Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, apart from the addition of the air rifle, which you get later on in the game than what you're seeing here, and the addition of a few things for your ship. Beyond that, you are basically playing Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, only it's set during the French and Indian War during the winter, and in the more North Atlantic as opposed to the Caribbean. Graphically, it's about on par with Assassin's Creed 3, which came out 2 years prior to the time this was released, and that means that it looks very slightly dated as of 2014. That's not to say it looks bad or anything, it's just that it looks noticeably lower quality than Assassin's Creed Unity. But then again, this was one of the last games being made for PS3 and Xbox 360, so I guess that's to be expected. But here's the thing, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag actually came out the year prior to this, and it looks better, in no small part due to the fact that it takes place in the Caribbean, and everything has this really nice tropical aesthetic to it. That, and they absolutely nailed the pirate aesthetic. The problem with Assassin's Creed Rogue, on the other hand, is that it just looks bland and uninteresting. It looks basically like Assassin's Creed 3, only it takes place on the seas. There's a bit of 4 mixed in there as well, but by and large, this looks more like Assassin's Creed 3 than anything else, and it is actually considerably condensed comparatively. This is a shorter and less expansive game than its predecessors, both Assassin's Creed 3 and 4, and it really does scream of being a side project that they shoveled out very quickly. This is in no small part due to the fact that a lot of the graphical assets are reused from previous games, and even the sound design is somewhat reused as well. Namely, the sound effects themselves, many of which were previously used in Assassin's Creed 4 and even to some degree Assassin's Creed 3. While the sea shanties are ripped directly from Assassin's Creed 4, the rest of the original soundtrack was actually done by Elitsa Alexandrova, and she actually did pretty good with this. It's all music that fits in rather well with the whole Assassin's Creed series, and it's actually rather good music to boot, so they've at least done a good job with that. But the voice acting is a bit all over the place. Some characters are voiced rather well, and then others, like Shay Cormac, the protagonist of the game, sound kind of ridiculous with the accents they're putting on. But I think that might just be because it's a Canadian actor trying to put on an Irish accent, and Irish accents are actually rather difficult to do unless you really know what you're doing with them. But if they're not trying to put on a goofy accent and they're instead just kind of talking normally, then they end up sounding just fine. It's all over the place. But regardless of the individual parts not lining up, the presentation isn't really the problem here. It's not what ultimately made me do an MTO rather than a full review. The problem is that every single bit of this game that could possibly be interesting is in the story, and everything else, as far as its gameplay goes, is trite and extremely boring. On the one hand, it is somewhat interesting to see a different perspective. You're going from the perspective of an assassin turned Templar because he sees what the assassins are doing and says, okay, I can't really let this happen. They don't really know what they're dealing with, and I don't know what they're dealing with, so I think it's better for everybody if I just stop them from doing that and try to keep the world in one piece. It's an interesting perspective, because what we're used to from the Assassin's Creed series is Templars are bad guys who want domination of the world. Problem is that this game doesn't do anything to disprove that. It's the difference between the assassins saying, okay, we're doing this because we want everybody to have free will and be able to determine their own freedom and their own happiness, and the Templars being, we want to control the world through domination, therefore it will have peace. It's still painfully obvious that the Templars are bad guys in this, it's just that you happen to be playing as one who is mildly sympathetic toward the beginning of the game, and obviously, of course, because of the various influences of the other Templars, he gradually does get more corrupted over time. See, the problem is that the game is trying to say that the Templars and the Assassins really aren't all that different from one another. Except it does this by showing that they are very different from one another. It's kind of self-defeating when you get down to it. But really, that's not the biggest problem the game has. The biggest problem is that the gameplay is almost identical to Assassin's Creed 4, and quite frankly, the gameplay in Assassin's Creed 4 really was not very good. It was split between the free-running system, which is the same system we've had since Assassin's Creed 3, and while it works, it is occasionally twitchy with regards to which surfaces it has you actually run on, particularly with regards to trees, which are oddly shaped sometimes. So really, the best thing I can say for the free-running system is that it's functional. It's still got the same exact map system, which requires you to go to different vantage points in order to synchronize the map and thus be able to see everything that's on the map. You've still got a ridiculous amount of completely pointless collectibles that add absolutely nothing to the game whatsoever. You've still got an open world that is smaller than Black Flag's, but is still fairly decent sized, and ultimately is kind of pointless because there's really no big use of the open world. This is a series that has been plagued by this problem since the very first game. It does not use its open world well. It's basically there for you to just wander around in and run across rooftops and such like that, and just take in the sights, which is okay for the first few minutes, maybe even the first couple of hours of gameplay, and then it just eventually becomes tedious. But it's made even more tedious by the fact that this is like Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which means that a large section of the open world is the open sea, which means that you will be spending an awful lot of time sailing from one location to the other, which takes a long time and is completely pointless. It is ridiculously boring to sail. Because at least when you're running around on the ground, you can find different things scattered on the islands, you can get loot, you can go and buy things, you can go and attack things and such like that. On the seas, all you can do is sail from one location to another, pick up cargo that is floating in the sea, or attack other ships. And if you attack other ships, then you're using the exact same combat system from Assassin's Creed 4, which is actually pathetic. It is a rather bare-bones ship combat system, which basically has you firing broadsides or firing from the front, which is explosive shots. And of course, if you upgrade your ship later on, then you'll get access to things like a mortar, but the end result is the same. You're just sailing around the seas, whaling on ships, occasionally you might board one if you get lucky, in which case you go over, you fight the guys on the ship, and then eventually you capture it, much like in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. The difference is that, unlike in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, where you were a pirate and that was definitely fitting for the theme, in this, you're just some guy. You're not a pirate, and you certainly don't act like one. It's just a mechanical holdover from the previous game. And the thing is, I already played the previous game, and by the end of the game, I was incredibly sick of the ship combat, so why would I be interested in it here? Because as it turns out, without the pirate theme to back up the ship combat and the boarding and everything, there's really nothing to that system. It's just tedious. And really everything in this game is tedious. When you're sailing around the seas, it takes you a long time to get to places and there's nothing really to do while you're going to those places. When you're fighting other ships, it's just a matter of, well, are you upgraded enough to be able to take them on? If not, then you better get the hell out of there, and if so, then you can sink them or board them. And when you're running around on the ground, it's exactly the same gameplay that you've had in several of the previous iterations, with almost no alterations whatsoever beyond the air rifle. Instead of Assassin's Creed Rogue taking a different approach and actually trying to innovate anything, it just recycles stuff from the previous games that really wasn't all that good to begin with. I mean, let's face it, you can only go into a combat situation and then press B to counter and then X to finish them off so many times before you practically fall asleep. Enemy AI is pretty much useless, the stealth mechanics are pitifully rudimentary for a game that's supposed to be about assassins, and ultimately the entire experience ends up being something that is mechanically playable, but beyond that, there is literally no reason to play this over Assassin's Creed 4 unless you just want to go through the storyline. And that brings up a pretty major problem that this series has had up to this point and is still apparently having to this day. They are just recycling the same game elements that they've done before, and they have made minimal changes to them. And while certain elements are fine to exhibit the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach, there was plenty broke with this. For example, the ship combat is pathetic, and the combat system in general for the entire Assassin's Creed series is even more pathetic. I'm pretty sure you could hand a controller to a concussed amoeba and it would still be able to get through every single combat encounter without a scratch. If there's no challenge, then the game ends up being a tedious slog, and when every single one of the games in the series is like that, then you have an entire series where you're going to have a massive case of franchise fatigue. You see, it wasn't so bad when it was just Assassin's Creed 1 and 2, for example. Assassin's Creed 2 was actually a good game that still decently holds up as long as you haven't played any of the other games in the series since then. If you've played any of them since then you'll go back to Assassin's Creed 2 and go, wow, this series has not changed much at all. A lot of people like to complain about the Call of Duty series doing the same exact thing every single year, when in reality they have been making strides to change the series up quite a bit. Black Ops 2, for example, had multiple endings depending on things you did in the game. Advanced Warfare had a completely different movement system, and then of course Black Ops 3 actually had wall running and such similar to Titanfall, in addition to introducing some hero shooter elements, of course. And then when you got to Infinite Warfare, it had things like friggin' starship combat. Now don't get me wrong, there for a while between Call of Duty 4 and of course Black Ops 2 you did have a fair bit of sameness with most of the games, but beyond those, they've done a pretty decent job of trying to go, okay, we've done things that people are tired of, so we're going to try different things. Assassin's Creed, on the other hand, did not do that over the years. They had very, very slight iterations on the things that came before, and in some cases they just straight up copy-pasted from things that came before and didn't even do anything with them. And then they had one game that actually changed things up, and that was Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. And how did they follow that up? Did they innovate some more, and did they try something wildly different from that? No. They just recycled what they had already done and then made very minimal changes to it. And contrary to what Ubisoft thought, recycling the same mechanics over and over and over again without actually fixing any of the major problems that exist in them does not make people actually like your games. This is why whenever you hear people talk about the Assassin's Creed series, they talk about how good Assassin's Creed 2 was, and ever since then, how crap it's gotten. It's precisely because Ubisoft never took the hint. They never seemed to understand why their games weren't doing as well as they used to. Shoveling out a brand new game in the series every single year, sometimes more than one game in the series within the same year, or in the case of Rogue, the same day as another game in the series, and doing absolutely nothing to improve upon the mechanics that came before and actually fix the problems that came before is a prime recipe for getting your franchise fatigue in full gear. And by the time you get to Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate especially, then you find that people are no longer actually looking forward to this series. It basically went from, oh hell yeah, another Assassin's Creed game, let's rock, to, oh, look, it's another Assassin's Creed game. Joy. When you've hit that point, you are well past the point where you were supposed to have innovated in that series. And Ubisoft never really did innovate anything. Even with the upcoming Assassin's Creed Origins, it looks like they're just doing the exact same thing all over again and expecting it to work again. Well, the fact of the matter is, I don't know a single person who's actually excited for Assassin's Creed Origins. They're just looking at it going, oh look, another Assassin's Creed game to avoid. Most of the people I know who were ever interested in that series have already given up on it entirely. They stopped playing after Assassin's Creed 4, or sometimes even before that. The last one I played in the series before Rogue is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, and I played that 2 years ago. I'll let that sink in for a moment. The last game in the series I played was the immediate predecessor to this one that I'm showing right now, and I played it 2 years ago, And 2 years was not anywhere near enough of a break for me to go, okay, I want more Assassin's Creed 4. See, once I put up the video for Assassin's Creed 4, I was like, okay, I'm done with this series for a while, I'm going to take a break, and then I'll go back to it later and see if anything's improved since then. And then I boot up Rogue, and I get pretty much the exact same game, only not as good. It's just irritating. Now, I will go ahead and take a look at Unity and Syndicate as well, because I do have copies of them, and I'll also take a look at the Chronicle series, because I know those play differently, so those might actually have a chance of winning me back over. But the mainline Assassin's Creed series is so deep into franchise fatigue that not only can the fans just not get excited for them anymore, I can't even really play them longer than an hour or two if it's just the same damn thing over again with barely any changes and nothing to keep me interested. It's the kind of game series where you look at it and you wonder how the hell it still exists. And while it is nice that Ubisoft finally took a break from the Assassin's Creed series in order to make Origins, it's unfortunate that they seem not to have learned their lesson that people want more innovation and not just copy-pasting things from other games. So at this point, I don't think the franchise fatigue for the Assassin's Creed series is something that can be fixed. Because this series is in drastic need of serious innovation, and not just innovation, but just a dramatic overhaul of its own mechanics in general. Pretty much everyone seems to be sick of these open world games that do not use their open worlds well and just throw in a bunch of collectibles without any rhyme or reason to them. Pretty much everyone seems to be sick of games that just try to hold your hand way too much and end up being pathetically easy and ultimately extremely boring because of it. But most importantly, people are just tired of playing pretty much the exact same game over and over and over again and not really having anything substantial change. Assassin's Creed is one of the absolute worst offenders for this in the entire games industry, and as a result, I really just could not bring myself to finish Assassin's Creed Rogue. I see no reason to, considering that I already played through Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which is pretty much the same exact game, but better. And frankly, I didn't even like that one all that much. And by the time I got to the end of that game, I was just tired of playing it. Obviously, that hasn't changed once I hit Assassin's Creed Rogue. Once I found out that it's pretty much exactly the same game all over again, I didn't care anymore. Which honestly is probably what Ubisoft thought when they actually made this game. Because it certainly feels that way with Assassin's Creed Rogue. It's just a blatantly obvious recycle just to make a quick buck before they switch over to the new generation of consoles. And it didn't work very well. Instead, all it ended up doing was contributing even more to making people not give a crap about Assassin's Creed anymore just because they're sick of them. And the one thing it needs, it's never going to get, because Ubisoft plays it way too safe with this series. And as a result, I have to wonder, if Ubisoft doesn't really give too much of a crap about this series, then why should we? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in later videos.